If you've seen this channel's documentary on the California militia in the Civil War, you'd know that there were quite a few members of the state militia who served the Confederacy during the war between the states and territories. However, in that documentary, we were just focusing on militia units in California. Hundreds of Californians left the Golden State in 1861 to head back east and fight in Gray. Among these Southern volunteers were several dozen men who had held government office in California before leaving to serve in the rebellion. The offices they held ranged from the federal and state to the local levels. There were several other government officials in California who weren't in the Confederate Army, but they supported the Confederacy in other meaningful ways. In this miniseries, we look at California's government officials who defected to the Confederacy. We'll start with California's federal level officials who defected to the rebellion, and then we'll work our way down to the state and local officials. Let's begin with the man who held the highest level of office before defecting to the Confederate States. William Gwin was a Mississippi planter who had been the U.S. Senator for California for a decade. When his term expired on March 3, 1861, he boarded a ship bound for New York, which was to pass through Panama. On this ship, Gwin was arrested by order of General Edwin Sumner, commander of the Department of the Pacific. Gwin was later freed by order of Abraham Lincoln, and the ex-senator quietly returned to his home in Mississippi. His plantation was destroyed by federal troops in 1864, so Gwin fled to Paris in France. Knowing the Confederacy was going to lose the war, Gwin lobbied Napoleon III to support a proposed colony of American slave owners in Sonora, with plantations that could produce raw materials to sell exclusively to France. The French king supported the idea, but Maximilian I, the Austrian-born Emperor of Mexico and vassal to the French monarchy, rejected that proposal, as he was convinced the Americans would just try to filibuster again. After all, this was less than a decade after William Walker and Henry Crabb's failed filibusters in Baja California and Sonora, and right after the fiasco in Nicaragua. Accepting defeat, Gwin returned to New Orleans and surrendered to General William Sherman. The next highest-ranking defector from California came from the lower house of Congress. Charles L. Scott was born and raised in Virginia and graduated from the College of William and Mary. In 1849, he was one of over 100,000 Americans who left the East Coast with gold fever. The 49er was elected to the California State Assembly in 1854 as a Democrat representing Tuolumne County, up in Sierra Nevada. In 1856, Scott was elected to the U.S. House as a representative for California, and he stayed in the U.S. Congress until 1861. One of his last acts as a public official was to give a long speech to his constituents on the constitutional right of secession. The speech was even published as a 16-page pamphlet, which had to have been contraband material in wartime, yet copies of the pamphlet have survived to this day. Congressman Scott escaped California and became an officer in the 4th Alabama Infantry Regiment. He was wounded in the leg at the First Battle of Manassas, and he held on for nearly a year until his permanent injuries compelled him to resign his commission shortly after the Battle of Seven Pines in July of 1862. Philemon Herbert is another former U.S. congressman who fought for the South. He was born and raised in Alabama, but he went to California in the gold rush in his mid-20s. He settled in Mariposa, a mining county in the Sierra Nevada, and home to the famous Yosemite Valley. From 1851 to 1855, Herbert represented Mariposa in the state assembly. Then in 1855, he was elected to represent California's 2nd district in the U.S. House of Representatives. Though he was quite popular, his political career ended in 1856 when he killed an Irish immigrant waiter in Washington, D.C. for refusing to serve him. Herbert was acquitted of manslaughter by a sympathetic jury in D.C., but he abandoned politics after the incident. He left California and moved to Texas in 1859. When the war started, he joined the 7th Texas Cavalry and participated in the New Mexico Campaign. He later commanded the 3rd Texas Cavalry Regiment of the Arizona Brigade. Herbert was wounded in the Battle of Mansfield, and he died of his wounds in 1864. Next, we have the highest-ranking rebel defector at the state level, David S. Terry was the Chief Justice of California's State Supreme Court until 1859. What ended his career in politics was a duel in which Terry, the Southern Democrat, shot dead a Northern Democrat, California's U.S. Senator David Broderick. In order to make himself unimpeachable, Terry resigned from office the day before the duel. He stayed in California for a few more years and ran for other offices, but he was not elected. He was tainted. He had already committed political suicide. Late in 1862, Terry left California and received an officer's commission in the 8th Texas Cavalry Regiment, Terry's Texas Rangers, which was commanded by his brother. Later in 1863, David Terry was promoted to colonel and placed in command of the 37th Texas Cavalry. Not long after taking command, he was wounded in the Battle of Chickamauga, but he survived. In 1864 and 1865, Colonel Terry was recruiting troops for a possible invasion of Arizona and California to keep the rebellion going. However, the surrender of Lee to Grant and the chain of surrenders that happened afterwards completely annihilated his plans. After the war, the ex-Chief Justice went into exile in Mexico. I hope you enjoyed this episode on California government officials who defected to serve the Confederacy. That's all for today, but like I said, there were dozens of these guys, so there will be more episodes in this miniseries. Thank you for watching the Civil War Wild West Edition, and if you haven't already done so, please hit like and subscribe. It really does help out this channel with the algorithm, so that other students of history just like you can find out this wonderful information about the war between the states and territories in the far west.